In the media, August in Britain is known as silly season. The reason? Parliament is in recess. There's less obvious news to report on, less political debates. And so more niche stories have to fill the gap and they take on added significance. Now, unfortunately, for him at least, the story this week in silly season has been that of Jason Arday. Now, Arday, as I imagine you've all heard by now, was a Cambridge academic in a prestigious role as Professor of Education. When he was appointed, he was celebrated as the youngest black professor in the university's history. But after extensive allegations of plagiarism, fabrication of data, and invented backstories, which all emerged sort of over the past fortnight, Arday has resigned. Now, the controversy is deeply embarrassing for Arday and for Cambridge University. But how newsworthy is it? Academic appointments at UK universities, even when they go horribly wrong, wouldn't usually make the inside of a national newspaper, let alone a front page. But this week, this story has been inescapable. On Thursday, Arday's resignation was the main story on the front page of The Telegraph. It was also on the front of The Times and The Guardian. The Daily Mail declared in glee that the scandal the left dismissed as racism had led to Arday stepping down from his job. It was also the top story on the BBC today for a while. The reference to the left dismissing concerns about Arday, sort of that you saw on the front page of the Mail there, that was in part a reference to a letter organised by the Good Law Project, which was signed by academics, politicians and other public figures, perhaps most notably Zach Polanski. Now, this was the video the Good Law Project shared to promote that letter.
You might have not heard who Jason Arday is. Jason is the youngest black professor in Cambridge's history. And to the surprise of literally no one, from the start, newspapers like The Telegraph and The Times have been calling him a diversity poster boy and just overall annoying him. But now they're taking it a step further and they're trying to smear him with accusations of plagiarism, basically saying his work isn't his own and trying to discredit him. And it's really interesting because it doesn't matter that academic journals, universities, everybody that has looked into these claims has found no evidence of plagiarism whatsoever. The newspapers do not care. And we have to talk about it. A baseless smear campaign against a distinguished black academic isn't just a personal attack. It's an attempt to shut down a black person who has a platform.
Now that video, which has now been viewed sort of over 2 million times on social media, has aged very badly. In fact, that's why it's been viewed so many times, because so many people are sharing it, saying this has aged badly. The reason it's aged badly is because we've all seen it now. There was a considerable overlap between Arday's work and that of others. There is also evidence of quotes from interviewees in his papers being either fabricated, we don't really know, or mislabeled. There's clearly some inconsistencies there, which sort of really puts into question the method used. And most famously, Arday's backstory, from running marathons with a broken leg to receiving pig heads in the post, have seemingly fallen apart under scrutiny. The Atlantic this week also had another damning piece comparing the unlikely events in his memoir, set to be released next week in the US, to the proposal he wrote for that memoir. And there are sort of some inconsistencies. So they say the proposal also lays out many of the same events as the memoir, but with slightly different dates and details. The boys who beat him up were not his age, but 4 years older. His suicide attempt happened before, not during the pandemic. And whereas the book describes Arday as having survived 2 brain tumours, the proposal says he had a bout of testicular cancer. No reference to that illness appears in the memoir. Nor does the book describe the time that Arday, then a teenager, was struck by a car and spent several months in a coma. According to the book proposal, the doctors told his parents that he would never recover and suggested taking him off life support as an act of mercy. Through all of this, he was aware of everything that was going on because he had locked-in syndrome. As I will describe to readers in the book, Arday wrote in the proposal, "These months afforded me another profoundly different way of perceiving the world." They write, the book doesn't describe any of this, nor that he awakened miraculously from the coma, nor the full year he spent relearning everything, how to walk, to talk. Instead, the memoir tells us only that he spent those months finishing his final year of secondary school and taking his exams. I was relieved, beyond relieved, the memoir says, when those were done. And the inconsistencies go on and on and on. Now, obviously, in a book proposal, if it's a bit different to the finished product, that's fine. If it's a work of fiction, you might sort of change the stories to make it fit together nice. Obviously, also, you might emphasize different things in the final addition to the proposal. But I mean, if you've got just huge, what would be like incredibly noteworthy events just appearing in one but not the other, it raises questions, clear inconsistencies. And they do go on and on if you go and read that article in The Atlantic. Now, when Arday was first appointed as a Cambridge professor, it was his unlikely backstory that led to him being so celebrated. So that's why the backstory is relevant. It's not just a sort of side note. He had numerous puff pieces written about him and even guest edited an edition of the BBC Today programme. So it's no wonder that the collapse of this story has elicited fascination, right? It's not a surprise that people find this interesting, especially as there's sort of so many developments. It has also, though, led to a frenzy on the right, which sees Arday as ultimate proof of the folly of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the attempt to make elite institutions more representative of society at large. It's an unfortunate situation, to say the least, and a group of Cambridge academics think their university is to blame. So their letter, which made the front page of The Guardian on Friday, accused Cambridge of unleashing grotesque racism by the manner in which it appointed Arday. So the group of Cambridge Dons are calling for an independent inquiry into Arday's appointment, and a professor of post-colonial studies, Priya Gopal, who is one of those organising the letter, told The Guardian this: "An independent investigation must scrutinise how such an early career appointment to a very senior and prestigious professorial chair was made, and what both the Faculty of Education and University Management have got very badly wrong. Whatever the results of any investigation, the university bears no little responsibility for the grotesque racism which this whole business has unleashed, and for the harm done both to the individual in the line of fire, to black academics as a group, and the broader field of critical race studies. This requires accountability now from those responsible, not a cover-up." So this letter, I suppose, is written by people very much on the left, I think, or sort of who would define themselves as progressives, who are saying that because they promoted someone who seems questionable and potentially underqualified, that's now putting their discipline and confidence in other black academics in doubt, especially among those who have sort of been banging this drum for a while. What's your thoughts on this story, I suppose, in general, Ben Secker?
It's a really sad situation, I think, and quite an ugly situation all round, really. You know, I can remember first hearing about Jason Arday several years ago. I didn't really look into him massively, but I knew he had this kind of very compelling, quite amazing, fantastical story. Obviously, now it turns out it was, a bit too fantastical, right? That there are some glaring inconsistencies. And I think that Guardian piece on Monday was the thing that finally, when I locked in and read that, I was like, okay, there's actually lots of things here that do not make sense. I think we've seen just time and time again, this is on replay now, whether it's the murder of Henry Novak, whether it's the attempted murder that was in Belfast, whether it was what was going on with migrants in the Moroccan-Spain border last week. We've seen that the right is really able to do this thing where it takes a single story, it takes a singular moment and then spins a whole story out of it that actually feels quite coherent. I think there is a section of people who are going to look at this story that's now being spun out of this particular incident and thinking, well, damn, maybe black academics are being over-promoted over white people. This is another example, perhaps, of the ways in which the tables are turning, and we've gone too far. It's DEI gone mad, as the right often like to frame it. If we pull out and look at the bigger picture, of course, we know that there's actually quite a lot of systemic issues against black academics in the field. They hold under 1% of professor roles, despite making up about 4% of the population. So they're underrepresented, actually. But these singular stories, these singular moments that the right are very adept, at latching onto, and then kind of spinning a whole story out of, they're very, very good at doing that. And that leaves, I think rightly, as Priya has put in that letter, her and her colleagues, it leaves, black academics vulnerable. There are now other black academics who are being questioned without any real basis, as far as I can see. The likes of, the popular historian David Olusoga, for example, is now being questioned online about his credibility. As far as I know, that no one's brought any evidence to suggest that David Olusoga is not qualified to do the things that he's doing. So there's this very tangible material impact that is coming out of this, which I think is incredibly worrying. Me and you have had conversations, I think, before about DEI and a kind of leftist critique of DEI, which I think is missing. I think sometimes there are people maybe on the left who are a bit too scared to bring a critique of diversity initiatives that is actually really, really needed. And in that vacuum, there was a very good piece by Jason Arday that we were talking about earlier, and he really kind of laid out a view which I completely agree with as well, which is that in that vacuum, where the left refuses to have an alternative to these kind of liberal DEI solutions, which deep down many black and brown people know are quite empty and are for show and are for ticking a box, they're not really about levelling the playing field. In that vacuum, the right comes out to play, and it plays hard.
But I suppose the reason it's playing hard here, I don't know, lots of them believe very unpleasant things, but is because their critique was always that the attempt to diversify elite institutions is going to lead to unqualified people hired because of their identity. And in this situation, it does seem like an unqualified person was hired because of his identity. So I suppose, does one need to say, okay, some of the things you were saying, you had a point? Or, I mean, how would you respond?
Well, I think it's about saying, looking at these diversity initiatives and thinking about, I suppose, what the end goal was here. Because I think part of him is not just that he's hired because he's black. I suppose they could have pulled anybody off the street in that case. They could have hired me. But they hire him as well, in part because of this kind of fantastical narrative and story that he had, right, that really kind of captured headlines. Really kind of made for a great grand story that I think really allowed the institution to be able to say, look at us, we're doing, diversity, we're better, we're getting better with our representation, we're ticking those kinds of boxes. And of course they weren't. It's just window dressing. There's actually, I think, at the heart of some of this endeavour to do these kind of tick box exercises, to me, it's an outgrowth of individualism. Of saying, here's this one individual, this fantastic black excellence, larger than life individual who's got this fantastic story. Never mind the fact that he doesn't perhaps seem to actually be maybe very adept at the job itself. Let's raise him up and put him on a platform rather than actually looking at how we make equality better across the board for everybody. And there's lots of issues in academia, not just with race, with class, with gender, loads of stuff.
Let's look at a clip because we do have some insight into his hiring. Because the BBC reported on it at the time. It was a very celebratory story. Isn't this brilliant? This was the head of Arday's department speaking in 2023.
We've listened to the voices of our black scholars and our black students. And some of it has not been easy to hear, to be honest. But we're able to face up to some of the structural issues that people face.
There will be those that think this is a tokenistic appointment. What are your thoughts on this?
The board of electors on your interview day were absolutely unanimous. We are so lucky to have you. You are the best in the world in terms of the research that you do.
Now, I mean, beyond the plagiarism allegations, was there, I suppose, academic fraud in terms of sort of some of the interviewees in the, his is qualitative research. So your interviewees are actually sort of the key data point you're using, and some of them are inconsistent. So sort of the same quote being used by people with different characteristics, and it doesn't add up. And then you've got the fantastical background. So, Cambridge could plausibly claim that this was all information which arose later on. I mean, they did actually also shut down anyone asking any questions. Carter Ruck, who are a very sort of powerful law firm, were hired. I don't know if that was by him or the university or someone else, but that sort of shut down one bit of reporting. Obviously, the police were called on one other journalist, and they investigated him for a little while, which was ridiculous. So there were a lot of opportunities for, what looks like the truth to come out. But putting all of that aside, I know you were saying you were listening to a sort of podcast with this guy earlier. I was watching a lecture with this guy earlier. If he was ever considered the best in the world in this discipline, the discipline has a problem.
Yeah.
Because I watched, half of a 40-minute lecture, and it was just word salad and nothing was said. It felt like I was in a kind of HR talk where someone was just phoning it in.
Yeah, sort of buzzwordy almost.
Buzzwordy. And and also I think that lady, she's the head of faculty. She is sort of another professor of education. She sort of does, I think, kind of like peace and conflict in education, something that sounds very wishy-washy. Like I think she seems like a nice lady, and she was doing her best. And she felt like she was very clear there. We've listened to our black students, we've listened to our black scholars, and And actually, to be fair to them, Oxford and Cambridge have done a lot on access. Like their student body is much more diverse than it used to be because they've been trying quite hard. But she thought, we also need some inspirational people in high places. And then they convinced themselves that this guy was a genius. I don't know. I suppose what was it? What do you respond in that video? What do you see going wrong?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? Because of course, on an individual basis, I've no idea what's going on in that woman's mind. Let's believe that the best in her. There is sometimes this thing where I think like black and brown people get hired to like more senior positions on the basis that they will play ball. Like they will be kind of non-threatening, or they won't appear to rock the boat too much as well. Do you know what I mean? And I think that happens with lots of different demographics, potentially, where we can I don't know if it's like this Faustian pact almost of like, I will agree to be your kind of shiny representative, and in return, I won't rock the boat too much, I'll play ball, and there'll be a kind of mutual transactional agreement. And maybe it's never like verbalized, but it's just kind of something that's there. So I don't know if that's also kind of part of it is like, well, we're not going to get someone who's really smart and who could seriously rock the boat on sociology, and then ask some quite difficult questions actually of our department more broadly. We're going to get someone who would just kind of has a great story, will be great in the media, they'll play ball, they'll play the role, and maybe there wasn't any more questioning or curiosity there. That's the key thing, maybe, isn't it? A lack of curiosity there.
So you're thinking in the interview process, what was going through their heads wasn't, is this guy talented, but is this guy threatening to us? And if he's not threatening to us, then we want this famous black guy.
Yeah, maybe not as crudely as that, but...
Well, they wouldn't have said it. These are nice, lovely people.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have said, like, they would have literally thought that in their head necessarily, but I think there perhaps might be an element of that. It's very difficult to know, and I think the letter did raise the idea of an investigation, right, which I think must happen.
They are going to have one.
Ultimately, there's still lots of stuff we just really don't know, so there should be an investigation further into this. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that was raised in that Guardian op-ed that I mentioned earlier by Jason, what was that he said there was a kind of institutional problem of a lack of curiosity, a lack of thought, and a lack of debate, actually, about what the hell these DEI initiatives are actually for. What's the purpose? What's the end goal? And I think that debate internally within academia and lots of other places as well should be reignited. We should not be afraid of having that conversation. I think there's a fear about we're going to be giving meat to the right. We're going to be giving meat to these crazy ethno-nationalists, these so-called race realists or whatever, who are obsessed with this story for all the wrong reasons. But if we don't do that, we risk something much worse, I think, happening than where we are at the moment even.
Yeah, quite. This is a bit like that first story. On the first story, I'm sure we'll be coming back to this. And I hope we won't, because that would mean there were more race rights. I kind of hope we won't be coming back to this story, maybe when the investigation is out. But this is already, one thing I feel bad for the guy about, I feel bad for the guy, a number of things. I'm not sure he doesn't.
Strikes me as vulnerable.
He strikes me as vulnerable.
Yeah. Which
isn't a good reason that he should keep his job as a prestigious professor, but also why I think one can feel empathy for him in this position. But on the most sort of basic level, the thing I really feel sorry for him about is that this story happened in August. Because if this was in like May, and there was like loads of politics going on, Andy Burnham's just become Prime Minister, this would not be front page of the newspaper for a whole week. But it's because there's literally like not that much else for political journalists to talk about. This is just filling up so much space. On that note, let's go on to a more significant story.